Welcome to the vlog. Welcome to No Boring Days. My name is Carlo Villarica and I just finished the Philippine Cycling Festival gravel race a week ago or something. And here's how it went.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good luck! Ride safe! Good luck!
As far as I know, there were only three of us from Cebu. Me, Sep, and Mikmik. That's Sep with number 381 and Mikmik with number 207. It was a mass start race. There were a few complaints about the mass start. Personally, I prefer a mass start compared to an age bracket start. A few reasons. It means that there's a clear overall winner. It's just a little more exciting. Like, you just know who's the fastest. Although, I personally think they botched the mass start. I'll get to why soon. I believe there was almost 800 cyclists who joined the event. It felt good being in the middle of a huge cycling community. And I suspect that Clark is an amazing place to be a cyclist. Well, there was a lot of off-road sections, plenty of beautiful pavement, and even segregated bike lanes. Man, when we went to the segregated bike lane, we were like, wow. But we were not here to explore. We were in Clark for the race. One thing about the race that I thought could have been done better was the neutral start. I think it was too long. They made the neutral start almost 10 kilometers long. Now, I don't know the reasoning for this, but as a participant, it felt like it made the race unnecessarily sketchy. Because once the peloton got out of the oval and into the wide roads, the speed shot up, which was weird for a neutral start. I checked my Strava and there's a 4.3 kilometer gradual downhill segment on Strava, and I averaged 41.4 kilometers per hour, along with a few hundred cyclists. So you would expect a neutral start to be really slow, and it was fast because of the downhill. But it wasn't fast enough for the front cyclists to get away. So what was happening was there were cyclists who were trying to force their way to the front, but since the front couldn't break away because of the neutral start cars, the motorcycles, the photographers, this caused unnecessary crowding up front. Everybody was just trying to stay in front and going at about 40 kilometers an hour. You know, just crowding in front. I tried to stay in the middle, and the middle pack was still at a very high speed. And once the middle pack merged with the front pack, we had to hit the brakes. So because the front would slow down every now and then, and it's basically the yo-yo effect. You know, that happens once you're cycling in a big group. So the yo-yo effect was in full display. I personally tried to stay away from all that as much as possible. I had no interest in crashing. The neutral start ended at the first dirt section. So from a very wide cemented road straight to a small dirt road. Now, I'm not the organizer, and I'm sure they had considerations for doing it this way. But if it were up to me, I would have made the neutral start end after 1 kilometer on the main road, probably once it got wide, so that the really fast guys could go fast, hit the off-road sections first, and the mid-pack would have some breathing room at the tricky fast off-road section of the race. So it was kinda chaotic, but I gotta admit, it was so fun. So once we hit the first off-road section, it was fast, slippery, kind of sketchy because of the number of riders trying to go fast, but super fun. It was very difficult to overtake in this section because people were still rested, full of adrenaline, and there was a lack of wiggle room around the trails. So you could see a lot of people stopping all over the first off-road section. There were plenty of mechanicals, fallen bottles, and even crashes. Unfortunately, Sep crashed again. He came out of it fine, but he had a really interesting race. I'll get to his race later on in another video. I think it's normal to be excited during a race. I was going through the first off-road section pretty fast, but I didn't feel like I was taxing my body. Then eventually I looked down and my heart rate was at 180. It was a reminder to slow down a little bit. I've had a few races / rides under my belt now, and I realized that fatigue hits very suddenly. You can feel really good, then a second later it doesn't seem like you can move your legs anymore. So my goal for this race was to have an even effort all throughout. It was difficult to be strategic with the effort because I had basically zero knowledge about the route beforehand, and my Garmin was acting up, the GPS wasn't working, and it was only useful as a monitor for my heart rate, so I could see it. So I looked down a lot, but that's all it showed. It just showed my heart rate and the time. So basically, I didn't want to empty myself early like in Bongabon, so I made sure to have a consistent, maintainable effort and still try to do my best. Nutrition and hydration strategy was similar to my usual. Every 30 minutes, carb intake. In this case, it was gels only, since I knew it would be a shorter race. And I had a water bottle full of water and another water bottle full of badass mix for my carbohydrates and Bix electrolytes for a big electrolyte push on the drink. Also added some pretty good taste to it. Oh, and this is where I got a slight smudge on the lens. Sorry about that. I remembered much later to wipe it. I need to get better at this vlogging thing, man. I need to remind myself to wipe the camera more often, especially on wet courses, but it's fine. You can still see some action. This next part was one of the first climbs. I think I saw photos of this section with a lot of people walking. So one advantage of having a mass start was that the guys early to the climb are typically pretty strong. So there wasn't much pushing when we passed through. Most people were riding and most people were getting up the climb. So the problem when the start is staggered by age group, at some point you have no choice but to pass riders from different age categories who are pushing up the climb. And depending on the course, the riders walking up either don't give way or don't have enough room to give way. This course had a lot more climbing compared to Bongabon. More climbing but less steep, which to be honest suited us Cebuanos fine. The three of us, we are not the fastest climbers from Cebu by far. In fact, as a group, we were generally quite big and probably heavy. Like I'm the shortest one and I weigh almost 80 kilos. So we are not small cyclists, but we are used to climbing because of Cebu. Cebu is full of climbs. Oh, I didn't say I didn't push. I still pushed the bike up the climb a little bit. There were still a few pushing up the climbs. All it took was one person to slip and a whole bunch of us ended up walking. Good thing we were pretty close to the top already. Oh, and here's a reminder, if you happen to be one of the riders pushing their bikes up a climb and there are riders behind you who are still riding up, just give way. Just give them way. Let them pass. It's really frustrating when the people in front walking their bikes don't give way. One of the challenges of organizing a gravel race is that in most cases, you still need to use main roads to connect off-road sections. The roads are still public and people are still meant to go through them. So here's a section where plenty of motorcycles were stopped and forced to wait for the trickle of cyclists to pass through. They were not happy. Here we are entering the Paradise Ranch. This area was pretty cool. The entrance featured a rocky off-road climb. Then once inside, we were literally climbing up a park with switchbacks, so you could see other cyclists going up as you climbed. When you finally reached the top, there was a cool playground with a dinosaur which reminded me of my kids. And on top of that, a great view on the other side of the park. If we weren't racing, this would have been an obvious place to stop and take a few photos. It was a beautiful part of the course. It was nice. I believe we exited the park in this grassy trail section. Here I made a mistake while going up the short steep climb. This guy overtook me and tried to overtake a bunch of people in this narrow steep section. And here's what happened.
That's right, bro.
He basically got in everyone's way and made everyone in that area walk. So my mistake was that my gear was way too heavy for the climb at that section. So I walked up, looked for a flat-ish section so I could get back on my bike and ride it. Went on my bike, tried to power through. It was not enough, so I ended up off the bike again and walked up.
What a mistake.
So I need to be more mindful of my gearing choices, especially when the terrain changes all of a sudden. Next up is where my biggest preparation mistake haunted me. Since I was traveling from Cebu to Clark, I had to take the wheels out for the travel. To take the wheels out, you have to disengage the GRX clutch. The GRX clutch helps the chain from dropping off the drivetrain, especially along bumpy off-road sections. So when I assembled it back together, I forgot to engage the clutch again. So the clutch was off the whole time. So of course, my chain dropped. I had to put the chain back. I lost a few spots on the race. And I didn't think to look at the clutch if it was engaged. It wasn't. I just wasn't thinking about it at all when my chain dropped. Which meant I dropped my chain again in the later part of the race. These experiences, they're always a way to learn something, man. The next section was one of the bigger climbs of the race. It was a steep road climb, and one of the biggest disadvantages when you don't know the course is that you don't know where the tops of the climbs are, which meant it was difficult to gauge effort. So ideally, you start the climb a little easy, then before reaching the top, you put in more effort. That way you can take a rest on the downhill. It's much more efficient that way, and you just won't feel as tired. Most people make the mistake of starting the climb with a lot of effort, and when they get close to the summit, they run out of gas, they're gasping for air, they're running on fumes, and everything just becomes hard. So normally, I would be able to plot the route on my Garmin and have a good guesstimate on when the climb ends. But for this race, again, my Garmin was a brick. It only showed my heart rate and time. But even if I didn't know the climb, I was still able to overtake a few people because I started the climb easy. So in the bottom of the climb, they overtook me, but I saw them again right before reaching the top. Since I didn't know where the top was, I was asking people if we were close to the top.
So how far up does this go? Does it keep going? I have no... It would be good to know when it reaches the top.
Someone said yes, so I increased my effort a little bit, reached the top, and used the descent to get the heart rate back down. I managed to overtake a couple of people this way.
Layo pa? Lapit na.
So this next section is the descent. A few of us were talking about this descent after the race. At least I think this was the one they were referring to. According to my friends, a bunch of people were walking down the off-road section of this descent. But to be honest, I couldn't remember much of this part.
Hello.
I just remember being behind guys on mountain bikes and thinking not to try to keep up with them. It's always tricky following a mountain biker off-road. You can get sucked in by their confidence and speed. But if you're like me, on a gravel bike, it can get sketchy real quick. The MTB guys definitely have a huge advantage going downhill off-road. But if you manage to keep up with them, you can usually catch up on the road sections, especially on this race, which had an uphill road section for the last 10 kilometers. Although this course didn't feature as much water as the Bongabon course, it still had its fair share of water crossings, which I guess is fun for some people. Me personally, I struggled. I ended up walking for at least 2 of the crossings. I just couldn't find the right line, and the water was deep, and I kept thinking in my brain that, like my drivetrain is getting wet. I kept feeling my wet feet, so I had a lot of like unnecessary distracting thoughts. Because honestly, I'm more of a dry cyclist, and I try as much as possible not to get the bike wet. But for races, I'm gonna admit it's pretty fun. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna get through them fast. The last climb heading towards the cool looking bridge was a nice one. You could see the top and you could see the people cycling up on the climb. It was also an off-road climb. I love little off-road climbs. So it was a remarkable section of the race for me. Races are fun, man. Whenever I overtook riders, it always made me feel pumped. Although I was trying to resist that urge, I was trying to overtake them at a speed that was manageable. I didn't want to exert too much effort just to overtake and then for them to overtake me again just because I got tired. So I managed to catch a few people here. But of course, I was also caught on this section by smaller, faster cyclists. Whenever I see small guys overtake me on a climb, I just tell myself that they deserve it. No shame being beaten up a climb by a smaller cyclist. I don't feel bad at all. Although, I do think about it whenever I eat chocolate on a non-bike day. The bridge was a remarkable portion of the race. The bike lane was kinda tight, so we weren't overtaking anyone, which meant we could enjoy the scenery a little bit more. So I took out my camera and took some video. And of course, after the bridge, that's when my chain slipped out of the drivetrain again. And you see those 2 cyclists that passed? I spent the whole climb catching up to those 2 just to have them overtake me again. Well, that's racing. The last 10 kilometers was a gentle incline all the way up to the finish. And one of the fun things about this race for me is that I got to meet a lot of fun people. For example, on this section, I met this guy on the road. I was asking him if this was the way back already. Then I looked at him and I thought, man, this guy looks familiar. So turns out he was Marlo from Boodle Buddy. So I followed him on Instagram. We had a nice chat that lasted almost 10 minutes. We even took a photo. It was like the most chill part of the race. So while it definitely is fun to race, it is also fun to connect with other people. And I think that was the best part of this festival. It was an opportunity to meet and talk to a lot of people in the cycling community, particularly the gravel community. After the photo, a small group overtook us and Marlo suggested we join them. So off we went racing again. The train was being pulled by this number 115 guy, and the guy was strong. He didn't seem like he needed any help. He was strong enough to drop a bunch of the people on the climb. I managed to hang on, and I took advantage of the almost free speed. It was still a climb after all, so there was some aero advantage, but we were still going up. Once we pulled into the oval, I wanted to try to be the first in the group to reach the finish. This was going to be my first official sprint finish. Unfortunately, I miscalculated where the finish was. I thought the finish was on the long stretch of road after this corner. So I decided to sprint to that corner, try to be the first one there, then sprint out of it as the finish line was in sight. So I sprinted to the corner, and I was surprised when after sprinting, there was no finish in sight. At this point, I wasn't sure what to do. I was kinda dumbfounded and kept wondering where the finish was. Before I knew it, number 115 overtook me. I didn't even know to look back to see if he was there. My lack of racing experience showed in the sprint. When I finally noticed him, I tried to catch up, but he already gapped me, and I didn't have a good sprint left in me. He was way ahead towards the corner. But you know what? He deserved it. He powered through the climb, brought a lot of people with him, me included, so I wasn't hung up on it. And that's the race. I finished with an official time of 1 hour, 43 minutes, and 31 seconds. Good enough for 23rd place in my age category. All in all, the organizers did a great job. It wasn't perfect, lots of places to improve, but if they do it again, I am coming back. I just hope they make the course a little longer. Maybe another 20 to 30 kilometers. Maybe another hour of riding. Just enough to make you question your existence on the bike. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you joined the race, how was your race experience? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe.